John, Croyd, Crenson, Jack, Braun, Captain Flint, Brain Trust, Earl Sanderson, Silver Helix, Chop Chop, Young Troll, Stopwatch, Will-O-Wisp, Turtle, and Xavier Desmond.
Hello, welcome to Card Table. So I thought I'd talk a little bit more about Black Trump just because I like it a lot. I guess I said all the generally speaking, I said the main points last time, but I just kind of thought let's just dwell on Volume 15 a little more because I really like it. It's one of my all-time favorites. So just going through like I said, there's 5 characters, so 5 authors doing those parallel narratives, as in all of the full mosaics or the braided narratives. Generally speaking, this book, even though it's 5 characters, there are sort of like 2 kind of parallel threads in a way, where the J. Aykroyd and Mark Meadows stuff, which is my favorite stuff, because I love those 2 characters and those 2 authors, Martin and Milan. Two of my favorites for sure, and the fact that those 2 stories kind of are intertwined with each other, I really love that facet of the book. But then the other half, or the other parallel, I guess, that kind of involves the other 3. The other 3 are sort of intertwined in the same way as well, with Carnifex, Puppet Man, or Hartman, and Zoe kind of all being intertwined. Although even there, Zoe's kind of off in her own little tangent, and then she kind of gets tied in with Carnifex and Hartman towards the end. But she ends up becoming involved with the Twisted Fists, led by the Joker terrorist known as the Black Dog, who we really haven't seen at all since Volume 4, Aces Abroad. And one of the cool things about Volume 15, about Black Trump, is that I mentioned last time that it has that sort of international quality, that real globe-trotting adventure feel that is, you almost could have called this book Aces Abroad, because it has that international flavor that I really like. But one advantage of that, it's the first book that's sort of, because of that international stage that it's set on, it's able to bring back for the first time some of those threads from Aces Abroad, where Aces Abroad had the characters going to these foreign countries, but at the end of that book they just kind of all returned to New York. So a lot of the characters that you maybe met in Aces Abroad, or threads from Aces Abroad, it was kind of like, well, when are we going to get back to those? Might be a while, because now we're back in New York. The Black Dog and the Twisted Fist is one of those that they are introduced in Volume 4 with quite a lot of menace and foreboding. They really, the Black Dog has really only one scene in the book, but he really makes an impression. In fact, it's one of the Black Dog and the Twisted Fists are one of the threads that I wrote about in a Tor.com article, when I talked about long-term payoffs and how sometimes there's these real kind of longitudinal narrative threads in the Wildcards universe. I believe I listed the Black Dog as one of those, because he's just so striking when he shows up in Volume 4, and then it's kind of like nothing. So how dangerous really was he, since after Volume 4 we never heard from him again? And Volume 15 is the one that really kind of pays it off, where he's back, and the Twisted Fists are very significant in this book, which is really cool. So that element of Zoe's narrative is really strong, I think, and the fact that she's the one who gets to write a lot of Croyd Crenson, the Sleeper, and I think she writes Croyd very, very well. I think most writers always get a good handle on Croyd. I think Zelazny just built the character so well that any author can kind of pick him up and kind of make him work. But I like Zoe's approach to Croyd Crenson. I think she has a great handle on his psyche. So then you've got the Carnifex and Hartman threads, which are very closely intertwined. Carnifex is sort of assigned by agents of the U.S. government to track down Greg Hartman, who at that point in the story has become a fugitive from justice because of various things that went down earlier in the trilogy. There's this sort of conceit of Hartman kind of fleeing the country and going to Europe and different countries in Europe, trying to sort of evade Carnifex, and Carnifex being kind of one step behind him, which is pretty. It's all very compelling, and that thread, they go to Ireland and they go to England, where they have to deal with another faction of the Twisted Fists, this sort of British faction of the Twisted Fists, as well as the Twisted Fists sort of nemesis in that part of the world, which is MI7, I think it is, which is the Wildcards branch of the British government. They're also called the Order of the Silver Helix. That organization and that whole concept and that name, the Order of the Silver Helix, which I love, are introduced for the first time in Volume 15 in Black Trump when we meet the leader of the Silver Helix, which is a character named Captain Flint. Kevin Andrew Murphy, a writer whose work I always really like, is the creator of Captain Flint, and I believe of the Helix, of the Silver Helix as well. That was the one thing about Volume 15 that really made me bummed that it was the last book. Back when I thought Black Trump was the last book. Back when I guess all Wildcards fans thought that, because I was like, I love that concept. It's I love that kind of James Bond, MI6 sort of British spy, or even something like the Avengers, the John Steed and Emma Peel. And so the idea of taking the Wildcards universe and giving us the Wildcards version of that kind of James Bond espionage British stuff was. I was like, oh man, I can't believe we only get one book with these guys. I really want to see more of them. And I am happy to report, not to get too ahead of myself, but after the books relaunched, the Order of the Silver Helix have become very significant presence in a lot of books that have come out since the relaunch. Almost as if they were reading my mind. Thank you, Wildcards authors. But for now, this is their first appearance. And we meet just a few of them. Captain Flint and one or two others. They don't get too fleshed out here. It's just more the concept, and the concept is and the name, all of which I love. Later books we get much more fleshing out of actual individual members of the Silver Helix, but we also get some members of the British branch of the Twisted Fists, which is cool to see, and actually also something that will pay off in some later books. Where we get some more details about the British branch of the Fists, which is very cool. So yeah, that whole element is all fantastic stuff. We also meet Winston Churchill for the first time, who is a wildcard. In the Wildcards universe, he is an ace, or at least a deuce. It seems that his only mutation is longevity, because he's something like 112 years old in this book or something along those, somewhere in there. They're 120 years old, maybe. I think he's maybe exactly 120 or 119, right around there. It was one of those things, the first time I read the books, I was like, oh, that's an interesting concept, thinking that it was introduced there. But if you go back and reread, he's in Aces Abroad, and I think it's established there that he's got this wild card power, which is longevity, where that book is, I think that book is set about 7 or 8 years before Black Trump. So he would already have been, that's the book where he's like 112. And now it's 8 years later and he's 120. So yeah, it's one of those things that was established early on, but it's one of those things that's just kind of thrown out there, kind of just a throwaway, almost like a joke. But here, we actually get to see Winston Churchill kind of in action. 120-year-old Winston Churchill gets to be an important character in this book, actually, which is a lot of fun. And there's a lot of cool action set pieces set in the British Isles. There's a whole action set piece set in Westminster Abbey, which is, I love that stuff. I'm a sort of what would you call it? A novice Anglophile. I don't think I could stand up to a true Anglophile, but I definitely anything set in England and with a lot of Britishisms I really like. Was even a little disappointed when Aces Abroad only had like 10 pages set in England, and they weren't really about England at all. This book kind of addressed that balance, and of course there's 2 books later that are entirely set in England, which or in the British Isles and the UK, England and Scotland and Ireland, and so the itch has been scratched since then. But Black Trump is kind of the first time to really have like long sections of the book actually set in Wildcards England. We get a true view of that for the first time, and that's an attractive element of this book for sure. And then you've got this other thread involving Mark Meadows, who's kidnapped by the card sharks so that they can exploit not his ace ability, but actually his just simply his intelligence and acumen as a biochemist, because they need someone to sort of recreate the Black Trump virus and create more cultures of it. which ties back to the end of Volume 14, where the Black Trump was created, and then much of it was destroyed, but there was still just a little bit left. So Meadows and his daughter Sprout are kidnapped to this sort of secret lab in I can't remember now if it's Burma or Cambodia. I think it actually is both, because at one point he has to be moved to a different lab. I just can't remember which one is first, but but essentially they hold his daughter hostage against him recreating the Black Trump, and he's kind of stuck there for a long time. He doesn't get to do much as a character other than kind of be in a lab and feel miserable as he's creating this sort of doomsday weapon that's going to kill him and everyone else. So the J. Aykroyd section is probably the best, or at least my favorite section of the book, because it's George R. R. Martin. He's writing J. Aykroyd. It doesn't get much better than that in the Wild Cards universe, and it helps that the sort of the case that he's on for a good portion of the book is kind of tracking down Mark Meadows. One of the great elements of that part of the book, the J. Aykroyd part of the book, is that we get to see that more of the whole Aykroyd and Crichton detective agency that I talked about. They established that existed in Volume 14, but in this one we really get to see what it's all about. Aykroyd is in charge of it, and his partner is Jerry Strauss, who goes by the name Fred Crichton, or he has a couple different first names in the series, but something Crichton. And then apart from those two, there's also, I mentioned last time that Azélie Rouge is the receptionist, a former kind of villainess, who it turns out is a much more benign presence when she's not being controlled by Team Elise. Sasha, another former mount of Team Elise, is on the team, and then we meet a character named Topper, who is mentioned very briefly in Volume 6. She's got a top hat that her ace power allows her to sort of manifest things, and pulling something out of a magician's hat, essentially. Visually, she's pretty much Zatanna. It's a girl in fishnets and a top hat, so what more do you need? I think it's Volume 17 where we find out that Elmo, who was the bouncer at the Crystal Palace, has also become an agent of the Aykroyd detective agency, which is a nice little detail for longtime fans, because Elmo and Sasha were both regulars at the Crystal Palace working for Chrysalis, but then of course Chrysalis was killed and the Crystal Palace burned down, and that left both Sasha and Elmo kind of at loose ends. So it's nice that both characters ended up getting employment at the Aykroyd agency. So yeah, that whole aspect of Aykroyd's thread is very cool. It just definitely gives you a sense of the Wild Cards universe evolving, that it's not going to be the same thing every time, that characters can change. So even a character like Aykroyd, who he's always that kind of wisecracking private eye, but in Volume 7 he was this kind of a relatively sleazy guy who just had his dingy little private eye office, right in the middle of Times Square, in the middle of the red light district, and kind of, got a sense that a lot of the cases he took were a little sleazy in nature. And now in this book, he's, the agency has a very upscale sort of image and has all these very professional agents working for it. And so yeah, nice way to sort of have the character evolve, but still keeping him very appealing. Another thing, and I think I briefly touched on this maybe before, when I talked about Volume 12, because I know I've brought up the mechanic, who's the character that Vic Milan created to be his kind of author insertion character, this kind of character whose politics kind of perfectly align with Vic Milan's. This kind of libertarian character who just knows everything, has the answer to everything, is always right, and then in addition, knows how to use every kind of gun, is adept at just about every form of personal combat. Had a little fling with Madonna. that's made explicitly clear. He's on the masthead of both Soldier of Fortune magazine and Rolling Stone magazine. likes all different types of music, likes opera as much as he loves speed metal and all this stuff. Like just the Mary Sue of wild cards, without a doubt. Always has read every book, always has an apropos quote from literature that he can pull out for every single situation. He knows the perfect quote that he can just drop. So sort of ridiculous, but also kind of gloriously shameless. This sort of, hyper competent Mary Sue of the Wild Cards universe, but a character who up to that point had only been written by Vic Milan. If he's this author insertion character, then Vic Milan is the author who's handled him, and he's the only writer who's touched the character really in any meaningful, like, long way. I think maybe he shows up for like a couple pages in Stephen Lee's interstitial, but so Martin writing him in Black Trump is the first time that another author really gets his hands on him for any significant portion of time. And God bless Martin, he just runs with it. He sort of looks at it and says, okay, if we've established that the mechanic is the most hyper-competent character in the Wild Cards universe, then that's who he is, and that's how I'm going to write him. So he really runs with it, and so the mechanic is sort of just as ridiculously competent and sort of perfectly adept and at ease in every single situation he's in. Martin writes him just like that, just the way he's supposed to be. And I was that always has kind of impressed me when I've thought about that. That's pretty classy, He could have used the opportunity to kind of bring the mechanic down a peg, but he goes by the rules. He sort of rolls with it. Very graciously, and just sort of says, this is who he is, so this is who he's got to be. I like that element of of just how Martin handles that character, and it's another element that makes the J. Aykroyd portions of Black Trump probably the most enjoyable portions, I would say. There's also a great sequence set in Australia in this one, for my one Australian viewer, Simon, if you're still watching. There's J. Aykroyd and his team head to Australia at one point for a confrontation with one of the card sharks, an Australian card shark, and that whole sequence, just J. Aykroyd working with his team and sort of getting into trouble and then using their combined powers to get themselves out of trouble, it's definitely one of the more enjoyable sequences. And it's another country, like I said, this book really takes you on another world tour. Australia's another one, so there's England, Ireland, Australia, Cambodia, Burma, China, and more. But yeah, I think J. Aykroyd takes the prize. I think if you were to sort of choose, maybe this could be a subject for a video, like a future video, choosing the MVP of each book. I think J. Aykroyd is definitely the MVP of Black Trump. But he's the MVP in a book that's full of great characters and great sequences. There's a great twist at the end involving Mark Meadows. There's like I said, a lot of great stuff with the sleeper. Some moments that, even though Hartman and Carnifex are on parallel tracks, narrative tracks, they have a lot of confrontations in this book that are always very fun to read, since they have this kind of history going back to when Carnifex was Hartman's bodyguard back during the whole presidential campaign, volume 4, 5, and 6. Carnifex was very closely associated with Hartman, and so a lot of that history kind of comes home to roost, as it were, in this one. And so yeah, there's a lot of payoffs. It kind of makes sense, right? If it's the 15th book of what for a while there was a 15-book series, then it really should be payoff after payoff. It should be all payoff, no setup, all payoff, and it pretty much is. I mean, it's really like it's a thrill ride. It's a real thrill-a-minute kind of book, and yeah, there's not too much, in my opinion, not too much negative or not too many flaws to speak of. I mean, I'm sure you could, if you wanted to pick it apart, you could find something. But for my money, this is definitely one of the all-time best ones, I think, which I said about Volume 13 as well. But that's one of the reasons I think the Card Shark Triad overall is just one of the best arcs in the book, because it really, it starts magnificently, it ends magnificently, just really satisfying all told. So yeah, 2 thumbs up to the Card Sharks trilogy, and we'll see you next time.
To try and give our love back some sparks, he said, we'll get your love growing. But before we get going, may I highly recommend Card Sharks? I like to go out dancing, My baby loves a bunch of authors. Lately we've had some friction, 'cause my baby's hooked on shared world fiction.